Well, I'd just like to welcome Neil. Neil, thank you very much. This is the third one of these that Neil's done for us. Always great to hear from Neil, currently with GoSpace, but also a highly respected author as well. Neil, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, and welcome everyone. Whatever it is in lockdown, I've lost count now. I'm not sure if we're all aligned across the world. I suspect probably not. I'm going to aim to give you a presentation over the next half an hour in relation to my views on the future of workplace consulting. I imagine many of you that have dialed in are in workplace consulting or are workplace consultants or are related in that sense. And so I hope that it actually touches on your areas of practice and areas of interest in particular. And when I was reflecting on putting all of this together, as Mark said, I've done a few of these before, just wondering really to myself how much of the content that I'm going to show you has really been affected by the global pandemic. And I think that a lot of the ideas, particularly in the first sort of, I would say, 2/3 of the presentation, are probably not much different to those that I would have pitched, probably somewhere in the region of about 3 months ago, because I think some of the trends within workplace consulting have been bubbling under for quite some time. So this isn't all sort of a pandemic response in any way at all. But what I'm going to present this morning is my perspective. It's not the answer. They're not the answers. They're just my way of sort of hopefully provoking a little thought and debate within our industry, because one thing I've always held is that we grow and learn together, and it's the strength of the workplace industry is that we share ideas, we share perspectives, and we learn from one another. And so if in any way at all what I say today is likely to sort of stimulate some ideas or response, then by all means contact me or write something and publish it, and let's keep that debate going, particularly in the situation we're in now, particularly with some of the changes that may or may not have a lasting effect on the workplace. It's really important that we as a community sort of live and grow and develop together. And Mark, if my video is still on, if you're able to hit my video to say the slides are taking centre stage for the next half of that hour, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So first question I'd ask really is, what do we actually know right now? There's been a lot of conjecture. There's been a lot of sort of, very firm views in terms of what we actually know. I've noticed the word may and other words like likely creeping into a lot of the discourse in the last few weeks as we start to realise really that what we do actually know is fairly limited. But I think it is actually incredibly important at the same time. And here are just a few of the things that I think we actually do know right at this stage. And I think one of those is, and particularly in relation to anyone in the UK, the government's very sort of, I'd say confusing messages last night and today in terms of what we are and aren't allowed to do or might not do, is that realistically a safe return to the workplace as we previously knew it, not necessarily in terms of the form of the workplace of the future, and we'll cover that today, but just a return to a workplace is only likely to be safely possible when there is a vaccine. Until that point, we are learning to live with this, whether it's increasing or decreasing in terms of an infection rate or how we're actually handling it. It really is only when there is a vaccine in place that we will be safely able to continue to behave in the very sort of social ways we behaved before. But something we do know about the office is that for the last several decades, through a multitude of data gathering exercises, we know that it has been substantially underutilised. We know that office utilisation in general, with a few percentage points either way, is around about 50%. So it has been quite interesting that the number of CEOs and CFOs coming out making proclamations of, we've just realised our office space is ridiculously expensive and we won't all be returning in the way we used to occupy it. Well, I think this industry has been fairly vocal in trying to explain to organisations for the last several decades that the office space is at least half empty and we should do something about that. Now that it's completely empty and not being used, I think we finally have some attention. We've also realised that a lot of people, by no means everybody, given people's personal circumstances or the nature of the work, but a lot of people can work effectively at home. what we have seen are some articles that have pointed recently to the fact that there's been no real loss of productivity from working at home. Speaking to one senior individual in a large global firm last week, they actually said that the response to sort of client assignments has actually been more effective, and the quality has been greater as a result of people actually working remotely. So, you know, there is a lot of evidence starting to be gathered about our effectiveness or not in terms of working at home, but we know that to a degree, and in the main, working at home is quite possible. Whether it's something we would like to do or not on a long-term basis is another of those debates. What we also know is the debate has fairly well polarized over the last few weeks. Plenty of people saying that home working in its entirety is the future. Plenty of people saying home working is ridiculous. Working in the office in its entirety is the future. And I think, I would hope most of us on this call today would understand that really it's about a balance between the two, but where does that balance lie and what does it actually look like? The other thing we really know is that an empty building, as most of those empty buildings are in a city centre, the buildings themselves have been furloughed in the last few months, really isn't making any contribution at all. The only buildings out there that are actually doing anything for us at the moment are the sort of buildings we're currently in, which are sustaining us in a domestic capacity, and those that are supported to sustaining life, whether hospitals, food shops, the sort of things we absolutely need. So this idea somehow that the building itself is the ultimate expression of an organisation's values and brand, what we're actually seeing is it's what an organisation does and how it behaves and the attitude it takes in times like these that are the real drivers of an organisation's brand and it's our opinion and view of it. Most of this we have known for a long time. And a lot of what we're now discovering are things that we've actually talked about for quite some time. What the pandemic has done is actually accelerated a number of trends that were already in progress and forced us to really look at some of these issues in a detailed way. But what I'm going to explain to you this morning from my perspective is I think there are 6 new literacies that workplace consulting will need to take on in a fairly short time in order to remain relevant. And when I say workplace consulting, I mean that whole discipline that really started with the Robert Probst view probably around about 50 years ago with his excellent book, The Office, A Facility Based on Change. If you're interested, I know Mark does another talk on that, but which is well worth listening to. But really, workplace consulting has been with us for around, in one degree or other, for around about 50 years. But what we've also seen is that when workplace consulting is out of the building, effectively workplace consulting is not necessarily operating in the way it used to be, doesn't actually have a lot more perspectives on what's going on now and what's likely to go on in the future than anybody else. Workplace consulting itself has been so rooted in the physical workplace itself that it hasn't actually taken on some of these literacies in the past that it really needs to. One thing I should say, just to be clear this morning, this has nothing to do with what the workplace will look like. This has nothing to do with design, aesthetics, nothing to do with work styles in particular. This whole presentation is entirely work style agnostic because my view has always been that the right work style for your organisation is the one that's most appropriate to where it is now and where it wants to get to. There is no global panacea for the right work style or the right aesthetic. So you're hoping for some fantastic pictures of amazing workplaces. I'm sorry I don't have any of those in the presentation, but hopefully there'll be enough here for us to get something out of. So the first of the 6 literacies is beta. Those of you who've read The Elemental Workplace will know that I've been an advocate for the idea of perpetual beta for quite some time. It's not my idea. The earliest source of this I could find was an IT guru, Tim O'Reilly, who's still very sort of active as an author and a consultant in the industry. He was also the person that gave us the term open source. And if you want an earlier version of perpetual beta, it's the banana principle, which is that the product matures with the customer. When I first saw banana principle, I thought it was something to do with the shape, but nothing to do with that. It's about the fact that we actually release something to the customer before it is actually finished, and we rely on that maturation process to happen in the hands of the customer. But in workplace strategy for a number of years, we followed a fairly linear path. from sort of data gathering to analysis to producing a report, which then leads into design, into construction and occupation, and then, if we're really lucky, a little bit of post-occupancy somewhere down the line. But the fixation has been for quite some time on the creation of a static reality, which is in that linear process is something that the professional team document and then physically give us on the ground. And in many ways, the rise of the agile workplace or activity-based working, something of a convenience really, because it helps us to think of the workplace as a huge playpen full of toys. We'd never get bored, we'd all play nicely together. But actually it would mean that the static reality was a possibility, because any changes that occurred within the organisation would actually be reflected in this fairly elastic space that we created in terms of the component parts and a very, as large a floor plate as possible that we could contain them within. But actually what we've started to understand really is that organisations exist in a much more unpredictable and much more fast-paced state of perpetual beta than the workplace. So if I was stating this all over again, it would be the fact that the workplace has to remain in a state of perpetual beta because it has to try and keep up with an organisation that is constantly changing faster than it can respond. This is why we see Leesman's data reporting that after a couple of years after the completion of a new workplace, satisfaction levels start to decline quite significantly. It's because that whole sort of relevance that has been created in that static reality starts to be challenged because the workplace itself can't quite keep up. So our future has to be much more iterative. We have to regard the workplace as a continual experiment. We need those feedback loops to ensure if the product is maturing with the customer that they're actually telling us what's going on. They're telling us how it feels, how it's working, and we are continually adjusting this. The occupant is very much within Perpetual Beta the co-creator of the workplace. This isn't something that exists in a very clear, delineated process where workplace strategy is the first little bit of this, because actually when we think about it, we're devoting a lot of time and we're putting a lot of money into a solution which is determined, probably something between 18 to 24 months before we actually build and occupy it. So I'd like you to think about this in terms of the fact that the workplace is never finished and the job of the workplace strategist is never finished either. And in the current climate, it's never going to have been as important to listen to the voice of the occupant as it will be in the coming months in terms of their experience of a return to a workplace in an environment where there is heightened risk and heightened anxiety. Listening is going to become an incredibly important thing. So based on that, the second literacy is one of dependence. I'm a bit of a history buff, and I was looking into the origins many years ago of the legend of King Arthur and came across a Welsh monk writing in the 9th century. He was the first one to list the 12 battles of King Arthur, which was then sort of what Geoffrey of Monmouth took on and sort of turned into the Arthurian legend. But when he was putting this book together, the Historia Brittonum, when he completed it, he said, "I made a heap of all I found." And I think there's still a huge amount of that tendency within workplace strategy to make a heap of all of the data that we collect and to do it all in one go. So because we can't move on to the next phase of workplace strategy until we've gathered all of that data, we are fairly driven to collect it all in one go, which means very often we derive a single cause from that data. And that then leads to the plan for the future. And I mentioned just before that this is in a sort of very, very sort of linear state. But the trouble is with that is that we don't understand the subtleties and the dependencies of what's actually going on the ground. So an example of that is that if we gather all of the data on our primary work settings and then our secondary support settings and then our formal meeting spaces, we're likely to observe a certain pattern of behavior occurring. Yet what we found when we go into many client premises is that where it's believed that there is a heavy sort of meeting culture and meeting rooms are very heavily used, we often find that as a result of the primary work settings not being sufficiently well thought through and not being sufficiently utilised in the first place. So what's happening is teams are actually booking meeting rooms as an opportunity to work together because the way that they've been asked to work in the primary work settings isn't meeting their needs. So we start to understand that by evaluating first the primary work settings and getting those right, and on the ground, and then moving into the stage of evaluating the secondary settings, we've derived a different pattern of demand from the primary to the secondary, and it will derive another different pattern of demand from the secondary to the formal meeting rooms. So instead of building more meeting rooms, that would have been the original response, what actually happens is we start to build less meeting rooms because we've got our primary work settings working more effectively. So we have to understand the dependencies within the workplace. So what we need is a much more iterative process of collecting, understanding, and adjusting workspace. I said that the workplace strategy had to become much more associated with a perpetual experiment. But mapping those dependencies and then using those dependencies to shape the future is going to become incredibly important, because they are going to evolve, and it is going to be an emergent state that we're observing. Hence the need for continual understanding and measurement and adjustment of that space. Understanding, shaping those dependencies going forward. We will end up with a very different outcome from the approach at the moment, which is to collect all of that data initially and then hope that we realistically, we could say the workplace strategy is a form of gambling in that sense, because we're hoping that the outcome will actually meet the need. And what this might do is actually might change the whole commercial pattern on which workplace strategy is actually scoped and is remunerated. The third of these literacies that's really come to the fore in the last few months, because it's had to, pure basis of need and responding to that need, is the idea of a digital literacy. Something that I realised when I looked into this a little more deeply is that, if we think now, most of us have got our cameras off. So yes, I'm sharing a slide deck, but if we were on a call with our cameras off, we would be effectively doing exactly what we've been doing on a telephone and conference call bridge for many years. And I wondered when the first telephone bridge was actually available, and it's actually as old as me. The first one was commercially available in 1964. So the digital workplace is by no means a brand new thing, but we could be forgiven in thinking about workplace strategy for believing that it might be, because our digital literacy is very limited in this sense. Now, if we look at sort of where digital tools are now, what is incredible about these webinars is where people are calling in from. We're reaching an audience across the world here. We would never be able to do that in a physical space. And if we convened a conference, we think about everything it took to put a physical conference together and to get people into that space. Yes, there will be some benefits from meeting each other face to face and having some social time together. But realistically, the power of the digital workplace is being lived and seen right now, at this minute across the world through this webinar. It is quite incredible. We have to shift our attention from purely the physical and start to understand in much more depth the sort of behaviours that occur in digital workplace. And I think it's been starting to be teased out in a lot of what we're reading about, hearing about now, in terms of the effects on us, how we behave differently. The fact that actually, one view is that actually collaboration has improved massively since people have been working remotely, because we're more available and we're more likely to be able to connect one another together rather than physically roaming around the workspace looking for our colleagues to realise that they're not there at all. So actually we've been able to connect much more readily and much more easily. But it's important to note that it's a different behaviour set in digital space than it is in physical space. We can't just assume that the two are exactly the same. And in the elemental workplace, I described that the social workplace is actually being that weaving between the physical and the digital space, and understanding how they complement one another and they can be used together. So I think if we've had one huge wake-up call as an industry in the last few weeks, it's this need to actually understand what the digital workplace is all about. And if we think of where the tools are today, and we think about the sort of the rise of the digital workplace in the last 3 months or so, we can only expect that the quality, the feature depth, the feature richness of these tools is going to be massively improved in the next 12 to 18 months, because the investment in and the innovation going into these tools right now is going to be phenomenal compared to some of the frustrations of getting some of these tools off the ground over the last few years. So they're very much with us. The digital workplace is not going away. It's had a huge boost in the last few months. The next literacy relates to service. And I found it quite interesting when the British Institute of Facilities Management, debated long and hard as to whether to change its name to the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management. And in the UK, there was a huge debate about which was the parent and which was the child. Was workplace the parent and facilities the child, or was it the other way around? And I don't think that was ever resolved. And there are definitely two camps that still exist in that respect. But there was definitely a push for those in facilities management, the sort of receivers of space, workspace, if you like, who were responsible for it over the long period of time in which the occupants will live and work in that space. So facilities professionals to learn much more about workplace. But interestingly, there wasn't any kind of push for the opposite to happen. There was no real push for those associated with workplace to learn anything whatsoever about how a workplace lives, breathes, is serviced, is managed, how it's changed over its life after the workplace is actually created and occupied. We might work on the creation of a workplace for 12 to 24 months. It's quite likely that people will be living in that space for 10 years or more afterwards, and a lot will change. If that organisation is existing in a state of perpetual visa, then we can expect to find that the needs of that organisation are going to change substantially and unpredictably during the life of that workplace. So it is incredibly important for workplace professionals to understand what facility management is, how it works, what pressures arise, and to make sure that we are all aware of the full property life cycle, from the earliest sort of thinking about property strategy right through to all of the detail of how a workspace actually lives and breathes over a period of time. So we need this life cycle competency going forward. Entropy is a term that's borrowed from physics, which means that we basically have less certainty of what's actually going to occur in the future than we do today. So that the lack of order and the lack of predictability only continues to grow over time. That's something that in workplace strategy, we're effectively handing over to those that are going to manage that workspace. So are they aware of the thinking that's gone into that workplace? Are they aware of that strategy? Do they understand it in its entirety? Do they understand how to live and work with the organisation through that space over a period of time? And are they ready to intervene when they need to? Because realistically, there will need to be interventions beyond the first day of occupation of that new workplace. The organisation will change at times to the extent that the workplace no longer becomes viable, suitable or appropriate, and it will need to, the team will need to respond accordingly. Are they ready to do that? So we have to understand within workplace what it means to actually be responsible for managing a workplace over a period of time. The next literacy relates to the culture of the organisation, and it's a little harder to get our heads around in this sense, but it's been the case for quite some time. I find that the workplace is seen as something separate from an organisation's culture. It might have a little bit of an impact on it, but the workplace is a fundamental part of an organisation's culture. It can't be separated from it. So if we think about the workplace as part of this sort of complex adaptive system that is the culture of the organisation. And a complex adaptive system is where the whole is more complex than the parts all added together, and that a whole series of micro events will actually impact the behaviour of the whole. So the workplace is having an impact on a day-to-day basis on the culture of the organisation. It's helping to shape it, and the culture of the organisation is in turn helping to shape the workplace. But we have to make sure that we don't consider that the workplace is just purely and simply an output of culture, or it's something separate, because otherwise we start to focus on the more trivial, sort of very much downstream issues that result from thinking about the workplace, and not something that really is more upstream from that. And this is reflected in this flowchart here. Workplace strategy is a long way downstream. What we actually want to do is we want to swim as far upstream as possible, understanding the organisation's purpose and its mission, purpose and missions, how that translates into its values, because that will actually then in turn drive the actual design of the organisation. Its digital strategy is often worked out long before its workplace strategy. and is a more fundamentally embedded part of the organisation because it governs all of the systems and the processes that make the organisation function. And then we start to understand the sort of work that people will do, where they need to be to do that work. And lo and behold, in box 7 on our flowchart, we have workplace strategy. We need to get into that top left dotted line green box. Workplace strategy is too often a practice that occurs way downstream in our thinking. And the more that we get upstream, the more that we get right back to the source, the more that we're likely to understand how that organisation is going to live and grow, and the more that we understand in that perpetual experiment how workplace strategy needs to respond. So we really have to see how the workplace is culturally and is embedded culturally in that organisation, and be able to respond from here. And let's not forget, in the last few months, the actual fundamental culture of a number of organisations is going to have changed substantially. The organisations themselves that come out of lockdown are not going to resemble the organisations that went into lockdown. And we often forget this because we think about, well, what's the office going to look like? Well, actually, how has this actually changed the organisation itself? You know, when organisations start to return to their workplace, they are not going to be the same organisations that left that workplace. And if we think that we're just putting the same organisation with the same culture back into the same physical space, we're going to miss the point entirely. And the last is a change literacy, the last of the 6 literacies. Now, it's often been seen within workplace, and the reason I hold this view is that very often workplace strategy occurs at the very beginning of a process in relation to a new workplace. And then another opportunity potentially for revenue generating advice is in the change program, which is usually one of the last sort of advisory services to actually be procured during a workplace creation project, because it's seen as a bit of a downstream plug-in. Yes, you might be invited to a few meetings at the beginning, and then it's a case of, okay, go away, we'll let you know when we need you back, because once we've designed this workplace, then we need to do the change. And what we need is a group of people in, or 1 or 2 people in, to come in and make sure that what we've designed actually fits the people, or actually, rather than that, let's make the people fit what we've designed, because we can't change what we've designed and we're spending all this money on it. So let's actually just try and mold everybody into being the perfect occupant of this new space we're creating. So let's try and change people. So let's try and get them to adopt new behaviours. Now, the interesting thing about adopting behaviours is adoption is an add-on. It's like downloading an app to your mobile phone. If I want to adopt a new behaviour, you describe it to me and I decide whether I'll take it on. When I take it on, like an app, I might choose to use it, give it a try. I might equally choose to ignore it or delete it or file it away. Adoption is a very high-risk strategy because there is no guarantee in any way at all that it will actually change any form of behaviour, which is why some of the adopted behaviours start to fall away when a workplace is occupied. But actually change is the dominant discipline. Change, we are leaders of change who do a little bit of downstream workplace consulting. We are not workplace strategists who do a little bit of downstream change management. So we need people-led strategies which allow people to adapt. So adaptation is very different from adoption. Adaptation means we're actually fundamentally changing people's operating system. If you think about the mobile phone analogy again, if you actually change your operating system, it's changed. It doesn't change back again. Evolution doesn't work in reverse. An evolution to a state that resembles a previous state might be possible, but it's still a progression and it's still an evolution. If we give people the time and the space to adapt their behaviours to a new workplace, they are far more likely to be successful. And that sometimes can be a little scary to think about giving people more time, because we think, no, we have a date, and that date everybody has to move in, and in that new workplace everybody has to behave differently. And so therefore, we need to make sure that everybody's ready. Some people are not going to be ready, but it doesn't matter. I don't think there's ever been a case of a workplace failing in total because people weren't ready to occupy that space on day one. So we need an adaptation-led approach to change, which actually is the dominant discipline. All of the activities that are technical and relate to the physical space hang off that. They are all part of the change process, and the change began long before we think it began, and it's going to go on long after we think it's finished. We may bookend change because it's convenient to us. Started on this day, ends on this day, but actually change is perpetual. Everything is flux, and it's the fundamental essence of being a human being is that we are in a process of perpetual change. And so therefore we need to look at the workplace in terms of sort of beta with its dependencies. We need to look at the workplace as being in a process of perpetual change. And that what we're actually doing is we're leading that process. We're doing the technical stuff as we need to, but it starts right at the beginning of a project and it goes on after that project is complete. If you'd like to know more, my next book is called Elemental Change. It's coming out later this year. Probably a little later than I thought it was coming out, given the current circumstances, but there will be more about that later. So these are our literacies, beta, dependence, digital, service, cultural change that we have to adopt within, sorry, I said the wrong thing there, that we have to adapt to within the area of workplace strategy going forward, for workplace strategy to remain entirely relevant. And I'm going to give you a sort of practical example, really, in terms of, because I get asked this all the time. So what do we do now? And those of us in the UK who checked in last night and have sort of woken up this morning to think, well, okay, so how does this change everything? These are the 5 things that I think we're going to need to do going forward, and then I'm going to give you a practical play out of what that actually means. I think our workspace is going to have to be repurposed to ensure that it's focused on getting people together and the right teams collaborating at the right time. I think what we're going to see is less people sitting in rows of desks with headphones on, or less going to the office just to have a desk or just to work. And we're going to be repurposing that space much more geared around the reason for being there in the first place, which is to work with our colleagues. The one thing, it's the one reason for coming to the workplace that we can't replicate in any other environment is that all of the social cues that result from being together in the same physical space. We're going to need to schedule that space. It's not going to be possible, particularly with the sort of the slow release of the possibility of returning to a workplace. It's not going to be possible to have everybody going to the workplace at the same time. It just is not practically going to work. And so we need to make sure we are scheduling who is there at what times, based on the fact that we're actually looking at teams working together and collaborating, so we can schedule our space based on team collaboration. We're going to need to adjust that. I've said several times that this is a process of perpetual beta, constant change. So the need for adjustment of that. We're not giving a static reality. We're not creating a one-time solution. And it's quite likely that most organizations will not get this right on day one. Most organizations will have a go and will need to continually measure and adjust that space and the allocations as they go. That whole approach has to integrate within a whole safety program. And all of the other policies and protocols and all of the rules and they will change over time as well that an organization puts in place. So the way we actually manage our space can't be separate from that. It's got to be fundamentally embedded within that. And there is going to be a huge pressure commercially on the release of space that's no longer required. If we look at the likely economic effect of the lockdown over a period of time, there is going to be a very big focus on the financial position of every organization. And so surplus space that's just sitting there, tolerated as we may have done in the past, is not going to be tolerated any longer. We're going to have to be able to consolidate that surplus space and release that. So I think the sort of repurpose, schedule, adjust, integrate, release is a way of us, looking effectively at how we're going to evolve our workplace in the coming sort of 12 to 24 months. And I'm just going to show you to conclude the presentation how practically that potentially plays out. So if we take a building if we take an organization with 1,000 people, our response previously might have been, irrespective of work style, but probably with a sort of fairly agile approach to the way the building would be occupied, would be to do a calculation based on around about 10 square meters ahead and say, look, we need a 10,000 square meter building. That would be sort of the older way of thinking and how we would do it. Now, What we might conclude, having worked remotely for some months and seen that productivity is actually maintained and seeing that we can cope with it and the digital tools work and we're actually quite enjoying some of the aspects of remote working, we might say, okay, so half of our organisation may well be able to stay remote working. And we've heard a lot of CEOs of large financial organisations say, look, we're not all coming back to the office in the way we used to. So there's quite likely to be a number of roles where we're quite comfortable with them staying remote. And we would then say, look, we've only got 500 people left, and if we apply 10 square metres a head, we only need half of that building. But the difficulty there is that people don't want to work in 10 square metres a head, and it may well not be practical for some time. So if our 10,000 square metre building was around about 50% occupied, what we may end up is saying, well, 500 people need 20 square metres a head, which is 10,000 square metres, and it's going to be 25% occupied. So we're in an even more difficult position commercially, and an even more difficult position in terms of team collaboration, because the right people may not always be in the space at the right time to work together, than we were with the old way of working. But if we take what I just said about scheduling, what we might be able to do is say something like, and I'm using fairly round numbers here, but say, look, okay, 500 people, but we know that not everybody works with everybody. Because although we want to drive as much collaboration in the business as possible, there are only limited numbers of collaborations that occur meaningfully on a day-to-day basis. You know, we can only work with a few other people and a few other teams. The vast majority of the business, we don't have much interaction with them at all in any meaningful sense. So if it was simplistically divided out, 500 people, we can say we only need to bring in 100 people a day. And we can give them 20 square metres a head because we've only got to accommodate 100 people a day. So we therefore only need 2,000 square metres. Now, if we add in some amenity space, because a lot of those remote workers are going to need to come in at some point for some kind of gatherings or all hands meetings to feel connected, it could be the case that we could put in some space that's bookable by people who absolutely have to come in. And I mean the sort of collaboration where 3 teams might be in on a Tuesday who regularly work together, but they might need one of the lawyers to come in or one of the finance people to come in to work on a particular project with them. So they would book them some space or reserve them some space for those people who may just need to come in on a case-by-case basis, which they'll only at about 3,000 square metres. So we've got a 1,000 people organisation, 3,000 square metres, but what's going to happen in that space is that because we're only bringing in a certain number of people a day, you're going to build your week around it. So the level of utilisation of that space is likely to be significantly higher than it was on a self-organised basis when we could choose when, where and how we work. So we still have a degree of choice, but it's a more sustainable choice and it's a more contained choice. Those people coming into the office are likely to be at a sort of utilisation level of 90% plus. The 10% is usually holidays and sick leave. So we could fairly well aim for 90% utilisation of our 3,000 square metres. So the outcome of all of this is that the divergent needs of people and organisations, where people are looking for better work-life balance, you know, some of the aspects of remote working have been beneficial. They're looking for more safety, they're looking for more space. And the needs of organisations who want more flexibility, substantially reduced costs, they want more from their space, they want to see greater utilisation of their space. We're actually bringing those two fairly divergent requirements together in one place, in a 3,000 square metre building that is buzzing every day because it's relatively full every day because we're achieving a much higher level of utilisation than we were. But people feel quite comfortable about that because they've got their scheduled day or two a week. They know when they get there that the colleagues they need to work with will be there, so they're not going to have to spend time looking for them or hoping they're going to show up. The degree of self-organisation necessary is going to be substantially reduced. So people are happy, organisations are happy, but what we've actually done is we've saved 70% of the real estate costs in doing this, and we've repurposed that workplace. So what we've actually done are the 5 things that I identified earlier. You know, we've repurposed the workplace, we scheduled it, we know that it's going to change on a day-to-day basis, so we've adjusted it. We're actually embedding that then in our whole process of operating, and we're making sure that this will live with us for some time to come. We're actually practically responding and potentially actually giving the workplace in the cultural landscape of the organisation a renewed purpose. I said in an article I wrote for LinkedIn last week that we're actually giving the workplace its mojo back. We can actually see in that 3,000 square metre building this sense of we all understand what the workplace is for, we understand how it's supposed to work, it's simple, it's easy, we can access it when we need, we can work with the people we need, we feel safe, we feel looked after, and the organisation has saved a substantial amount of money. So that's what we call smart scheduling. The GoSpace tool is able to support all of that, but I think that approach takes on board all of those 6 new literacies that I've described. It has a practical outcome, and it gives us a sense of understanding of where the workplace will go in the future. And I think more than anything, if I've in any way at all been, sort of likely to have sort of put some fear into anybody that workplace strategy has to evolve a long way before they can feel comfortable with it. Actually, I think what this does is it gives workplace strategy a healthy future. It very much puts workplace strategy in the strategic realm within an organisation. And I think if we can just take on those 6 literacies and we can embed them in what we do, then workplace strategy has a really healthy and beneficial future. And that's why I'm going to pause for breath and ask Mark to stick the video back on and hopefully take a few questions. Thank you.
I have power to turn your video off, but not to turn it back on, so you might have to do that.
Okay, right. That's going to be interesting. I might not be able to do that because my cursor just sort of bobbles around the corner of my screen at the moment. So, but I'm very happy sitting here. Obviously, you know I'm here, but I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, some observations. Not too sure whether you want to give your comments on this. How do you make home working better? Healthier as a part of the workplace strategy?
Other than sending everyone a home a mill, a chair and desk, of course. How do we make home working better? That's, I think, the evolution of. I mean, I think first of all, it's the home working that a lot of us are in at the moment is not the home working we might have chosen, and it's certainly not the sort of the panacea. Those of us who are involved in homeschooling as well as home working with a couple of adults at home and a number of children are finding it quite a stressful experience at times. So, I don't think this is necessarily home working as we would design it. We should also bear in mind the fact that we're denied the local outlets that very often are important to us when we're working remotely. So I tend to say it's remote working, and I tend to say it's more local working as a response to that. Of which home is just one of the many places in which we may choose to work. In relation to home working specifically, I think, in the same way that we organise our time and our day and the resources we need when we're in a workplace, I think we're just as capable of doing that. But I think it's a case of sort of working out patterns and of working that work for us, and how we manage our time and how we manage our availability. Because one of the things we don't want home working to become is this, is this huge intrusion into our life where we can't seem to switch off and everybody expects that we'll be available all of the time. So I think that's in our sphere to manage, and I'm sure that most organisations are open to people managing it in that way and being quite clear on how they work at home. But I think I would urge people to think of it as local working. To think of there being some other resources around. I mean, I've worked at home quite extensively for many years. I'm very comfortable with it, but I often take myself off to a local cafe for a couple of hours just for a change of scenery and just to sort of see some different life occurring. So I think that once local amenities are back, and schools are back, it will really change our perspective again.
Okay, I just shared online a link to our working from home assessment tool that you can use. Another question, big question. What's going to happen to city centres?
It's a very good question, actually, and I think something that I didn't cover here that I think has been quite fascinating is the fact that our workplaces are. It's become very apparent that sort of the place our workplaces have in the broader environment in which they exist. And if it's done one thing for workplace thinking, the pandemic, it's that we're very conscious of sort of where we site our workplaces and what support occurs around them. Everything from the urban environment itself to transport to how we get to that workplace. And then linked back to the problem, which by no means has gone away, whilst it's had what can only be described as a little bit of a breather. We still have a climate emergency, and that climate emergency will sort of, will rear its head again very soon. The more that the sort of the commercial life of cities starts to slowly find its way back. But I think we have to start considering the workplace in relation to the very broadest possible urban environment, because I think everything in that respect is going to change. But I think we're going to see a fairly substantial change of domicile for a lot of people in a lot of urban centres. People who decided to live near the city centre because they wanted they wanted the sort of the buzz and the vibe of the city centre. I probably had a fairly torrid time in working at home in the last few months. Limited access to green space. So I'm probably going to take different decisions from here. And I think there's going to have to be a substantial review of transport infrastructure in most cities going forward. What do we really need? But I think more than anything, we will see potentially see the drive to consolidate workplaces in large buildings in city centres reverse over the next few years. I think we will see a lot more local solutions and a lot more workspace moved to key interface hubs, if you like, on city fringes and in suburban areas.
Thank you. Neil, how radical do you think organisations will truly be post-COVID? Will they really affect significant real estate gains, or will they return to the comfort of what they already know?
It's interesting, isn't it? You say comfort. I'm not sure it was especially comfortable because workplace strategy was alive and well, and we hadn't arrived at any sort of panacea. And it is quite interesting with people talking about stresses of working at home. Well, we've been talking about some pretty serious stress in the workplace for the last decade or two. Some of the things that we're just scratching the surface of in relation to remote or home working have been prevalent in the workplace for a long time. So I'm not necessarily sure it's a comfort, but it's a comfort in terms of it's what people know. I think a lot will be learned as this plays out over the coming months, but I really do think, as a colleague of mine said last week on a LinkedIn post, there'll be two sorts of organisations. There'll be those who try and return to the way things used to be as far as possible, and there'll be those who seize the opportunity to look at their organisation, write up that sort of run up that series of boxes in the flowchart that I identified right back to original purpose. There'll be a number of organisations who choose to reinvent themselves and potentially reach for something different. And so I think there will be some polarisation because I'm not sure there's a lot of room for compromise between. But I've said many times, I think this is an incredible opportunity for organisations to reinvent themselves and to create a better working life and working environment for their people, which I think will be repaid in spades in terms of the performance and the loyalty and the commitment they get from people. I think we're on the cusp of something amazing. We just can't waste the opportunity.
Thank you, Neil. Neil, how do you think the effect of scheduled working practices affect the culture of organisation? Would the group or teams working at the office create a tribe mentality that differs depending on who's there?
Now that's a good question. I think if we think back to the workplaces we left when the doors were closed, and we think back to our day-to-day behaviours and we think about what worked and what didn't work, most of the time, most people were in a workspace where they interacted with, a very small percentage of the colleagues in the same building. We actually know a very small percentage of people in our workplace. We interact on a sort of, on a day-to-day basis with far fewer. And so, I don't think it's this. We weren't living in some kind of ideal environment where everybody knew and worked with everybody else, and we're all friends, and we all socialised, and we did all of those things. We liked the buzz of having a lot of people around us. I grant that. But most workplaces, and at GoSpace, we've got data on many workplaces. We were seeing utilisation levels at a peak falling below 50% on a regular basis. So we were seeing, less than half the people allocated to that workspace actually being there at peak. When we started to look at averages and we started to look at patterns over the week, I mean, that would often fall to around about 25%. So before the pandemic, there was not this ideal scenario where everybody was in all the time and the whole place was buzzing and everybody was working with everybody else. And I just urge people to try and recall what life used to be like, because it would be very easy to start in our mind imagining a very different picture from the actual reality. And a lot of organisations we worked with were really struggling, even those that have provided a fantastic workplace. You know, were really struggling because people were actually choosing to work when, where, and how that they needed. You know, they were being asked to do that, so lo and behold, they were doing it. And however fantastic the workplace it was not necessarily the default choice of everyone on a day-to-day basis. Just think about the levels of attendance you see on a Friday. I mean, 25% would be quite successful for a lot of organisations on a Friday. So, you know, what are our people telling us on that basis? So actually the opportunity to make sure that we can actually work with the people we need to without having to spend hours trying to find them, without having to book things, without having to try and work out where they're going to be, but to know they're going to be there, but also to know that we can change that schedule with you know, very, very quickly and easily. I mean, we can run a new scenario in less than a minute using ghost-based technology, and that's how quick it is. Now, we don't need to necessarily think that we're creating this one-time solution. So I think sometimes we get hung up on the thinking that got us to the point of the lockdown, that is all that's available to us. No, we can change those schedules with a regularity. We can output the information to colleagues in terms of, you know, to be in or not to be in. That is all quite possible. So scheduling is not this sort of one-time fix that means you're only going to see a small number of people in the organisation. It just means that we're going to get a lot more use out of a resource that is likely to become more scarce in the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put two questions together. Someone was asking about how local hubs fit into the new approach. You did start to answer. But another question was, how much input do you think organisations will have over whether their staff choose to work outside the office, e.g. at home or local co-working spaces?
I said sort of earlier in the talk that, sorry.
Do you think they would fund these options?
Well, I think that organisations are really going to have to listen to their people like never before. I think this really is a time where, you know, understanding how people feel, understanding what they need is going to be absolutely vital. And the organisations that will be most successful in responding to this will have the best possible process for listening to people and responding to people. Those that sort of shut them out and say this is what we're going to do regardless are going to find that they get a very poor response, because people are worried, they're very anxious, they're concerned about a return to the workplace. You know, you only need to see that from the completely mixed response we had to the British government's sort of new information last night, is that there's a lot of fear underneath it all, because we don't want to catch this thing. So consequently, you know, the need for people to feel they can express themselves in a safe environment and for organisations to listen is going to be absolutely vital, because the solutions, as they change over time, are going to have to be co-created.
Neil, thank you very much for your time. We're up to 1 o'clock. I'd like to thank everyone. Sorry we couldn't answer everyone's questions, and I'm sorry I'm hearing that you can't hear me too well. My apologies for that. Neil, thank you for an excellent session, and we look forward to hearing more from you. We will follow this up with a link to Neil's website, a few thoughts. We're not going to be sharing the slides, and also a link to Neil's book. I recommend it, Elemental Workplace. But Neil, thank you very much for your time. I've also just shared a link to all our webinars, which we have a lot coming up over the next few weeks. Neil, thank you very much for your time. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.